Every SEAL's got a call sign, Lieutenant Commander. So, tell me, Admiral Blake Donovan's voice carried across the war room with practiced authority, drawing 30 pairs of eyes toward the woman standing alone at the back of the conference table. What's yours, miss? The emphasis on that final word landed like a slap. Not commander, not ward, just miss, delivered with the kind of smile that invited everyone else to join the joke. Around the room, several officers chuckled. Commander Grant Holloway leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, grinning. A young lieutenant near the projection screen covered his mouth, shoulders shaking. The morning briefing on tactical operations in the South China Sea had just become entertainment. Lieutenant Commander Tessa Ward stood motionless. She wore the standard Navy working uniform, sleeves rolled precisely to regulation length, hands relaxed at her sides. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun. No jewelry, no expression. At 35, she'd been assigned to SEAL Command as a battlefield intelligence analyst for exactly 6 weeks, long enough for everyone to form opinions, short enough that no one took her seriously. The woman who spent her days reviewing satellite imagery and compiling threat assessments, the analyst playing soldier. Donovan waited, still smiling. 52 years old, decorated from 3 combat deployments, chest full of ribbons that caught the overhead lights. He stood at the head of the table with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been challenged in this room. Behind him, the massive display screen showed real-time satellite feeds and mission parameters. The flags of the United States and Naval Special Warfare Command flanked the doorway. This was his domain. "Sir, maybe she doesn't have one yet," Holloway offered, his voice dripping with mock helpfulness. "Still in training?" That got a bigger laugh. Someone near the coffee station muttered something about basic qualifications. Another voice added that maybe they should check if she'd passed her swim test. Tessa remained still. Her breathing stayed even. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. The pattern so automatic she didn't have to think about it. Her right hand rested against her thigh, thumb aligned with the seam of her pants. Small details, invisible to most, but not to everyone. At the far end of the table, Master Chief Vincent Hale, 55 years old and carrying more operational experience than half the room combined, had stopped reviewing his briefing notes. His eyes narrowed slightly as he watched the way Ward held herself. The absolute stillness, the controlled breathing, the stance that looked relaxed but kept her weight balanced, ready to move in any direction. He'd seen that posture before, not often, but once was enough to remember. Tessa's gaze remained fixed on Donovan. When she spoke, her voice carried no emotion, no defensiveness, no anger, just 4 words, delivered with the same flat calm she might use to read coordinates off a map. "Red Mirage, sir." The laughter stopped, not gradually. It cut off like someone had thrown a switch. The lieutenant who had been grinning dropped his pen. It hit the floor with a sharp crack that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Holloway's smile froze, then melted into something uncertain. Near the projection screen, Captain Eli Rourke went pale. His hand, which had been reaching for his coffee cup, stopped mid-motion and slowly lowered to the table. Donovan's expression didn't change for 3 full seconds. Then his eyebrows drew together, his head tilted slightly, like he hadn't heard correctly. "Repeat that." "Red Mirage, sir." The Admiral's jaw tightened. Around the room, officers exchanged glances. A few looked confused, junior personnel who wouldn't know the name, but the senior staff, the ones who'd been around longer, sat very still. Hale straightened in his chair. Rourke's breathing had gone shallow. Holloway shifted his weight, suddenly very interested in the folder in front of him. "That's not funny, Lieutenant Commander." Donovan's voice had lost its jovial edge. Something harder had taken its place. "Red Mirage was killed in action 2 years ago. You want to explain why you're disrespecting fallen operators?" Tessa hadn't moved. Her hands remained at her sides. Her expression stayed neutral. When she answered, her voice carried the same measured cadence. "Records can be corrected, sir." For a moment, nobody moved. The war room's climate control hummed softly. Outside the reinforced windows, the California morning sun cast long shadows across Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The distant sound of a helicopter passing overhead barely registered. All attention locked on the woman standing at the back of the room, and the Admiral whose face had gone from amused to dangerously still. Donovan placed both hands flat on the table, his fingers spread wide, pressing down hard enough that his knuckles went white. "You have 5 seconds to walk that back." Tessa didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into the leather folder she'd been holding. The one everyone assumed contained just another analyst's briefing packet. Her movements stayed deliberate, unhurried. She withdrew a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table in front of her. From where Donovan stood, he couldn't read it, but something about the way she set it down, the careful precision, made his jaw clench tighter. "I'm not walking anything back, Admiral." Her voice remained calm, professional. "I'm requesting access to the biometric verification system." "Denied." Donovan straightened. "This briefing is classified. You're out of line, Lieutenant Commander. In fact..." He turned toward the two military police officers stationed by the door. "Escort her out, now." The MPs moved forward, their boots heavy on the polished floor. Tessa's breathing pattern didn't change. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. Her right hand shifted slightly, thumb moving from the seam of her pants to rest against her hip. It looked casual. Hale recognized it as something else entirely. A ready position, weight redistributed, prepared for contact but offering no threat. SEER training. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. The kind of defensive posture they drilled into operators who might end up in hostile custody. Why would an analyst know SEER positions? "Sir." Hale's voice cut through the tension. Not loud, but carrying the weight of 3 decades in the teams. "Maybe we should hear her out." "Master Chief, with respect, this isn't up for discussion." Donovan's tone allowed no argument. "Whatever game she's playing, it's not a game." Tessa spoke over him, something nobody did to an admiral in his own command center. Several officers inhaled sharply, but her voice stayed level, factual. "The biometric system will verify my identity. If I'm wrong, I'll leave. If I'm right, you have a problem." Holloway leaned forward. "Sir, should we flag her for psych evaluation? This is..." "I know what this is." Donovan's eyes never left Tessa. "It's insubordination. And it's over." He nodded to the MPs. "Remove her." The 2 men reached Tessa's position. One of them, a corporal in his mid-20s, reached for her arm. She didn't pull away, didn't resist, but she also didn't move. Her gaze shifted to Donovan, and for the first time something flickered in her expression. Not anger, not fear, something colder. "The system is right there." She nodded toward the biometric console built into the wall near the main display screens. 30 seconds. That's all I'm asking." "You're asking for a court-martial." Donovan's voice dropped lower. "MPs, I said remove her." The corporal's hand closed around her upper arm. Tessa allowed it. Let him begin to guide her toward the door. But as they passed the console, she moved. Not violently. There was no struggle, no sudden jerking motion. She simply stepped sideways, smoothly slipping the MP's grip, and placed her right hand flat against the biometric scanner before anyone could react. The scanner lit up. Red LEDs washed across her palm, reading prints and subdermal patterns. The screen above it flashed, scanning, accessing database. "Please wait." "Get her away from that." Holloway was on his feet, but Tessa had already stepped back, hands raised to show she wasn't touching anything else. The MPs grabbed both her arms this time, holding firm, but the scanner kept running. Everyone in the room watched the screen. Scanning, accessing database, cross-referencing classified personnel files. The process took 8 seconds. It felt like 8 minutes. Nobody spoke. Rourke had stood up from his chair, staring at the console like it might explode. Hale remained seated, but his posture had changed. Forward, alert, focused entirely on Ward. Donovan's face had gone from angry to something harder to read. His eyes narrowed. A muscle worked in his jaw. The screen changed. Access denied. Holloway exhaled, relief obvious. "There, she's not..." "Secondary verification required. Initiating protocol override. Biometric verification in progress." Every light in the war room flickered. The main display screens went dark. For 3 heartbeats, the only illumination came from emergency exit signs and the red glow of the biometric scanner. Then the screens came back. Not with the tactical feeds from before, but with something else entirely. Black background, white text, and a seal that made half the room straighten in their chairs. Naval Special Warfare Command Classified Personnel Verification System Warning. Unauthorized access punishable under UCMJ, Article 92. The text scrolled up. New lines appeared. Biometric match detected. Operator 07 Mirage. Status reactivated. Nobody moved. The words hung on the screen like an accusation. Donovan's face had drained of color, Holloway sat down heavily, his chair scraping against the floor. Near the coffee station, a young ensign backed up until he hit the wall. Rourke's hands had come up to cover his mouth. His eyes were wide, fixed on Tessa with an expression somewhere between horror and recognition. If you've ever had to prove your existence to the people who erased you, hit that like button. Because some truths refuse to stay buried, and this one is about to rewrite everything they thought they knew. The MPs had released Tessa's arms. They stood beside her, uncertain, looking to Donovan for guidance. But the Admiral wasn't looking at them. He stared at the screen, then at Tessa, then back at the screen. When he finally spoke, his voice came out rough. That's not possible." Tessa reached up with her left hand and pushed her right sleeve back. Slowly, deliberately. The fabric slid up past her wrist, revealing the pale skin of her inner forearm. And there, just below the wrist joint, dark ink stood out against her skin. A small tattoo, simple, unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. A red dot inside a black circle. Below it, the number 07. The Mirage protocol insignia. "Holy..." Rourke's voice broke. He took a stumbling step forward, pointing at her arm with a shaking hand. "Sir, that's the Mirage mark. He couldn't finish. His face had gone from pale to flushed, sweat beading on his forehead. Hale stood up. Unlike everyone else's shocked stillness, his movement was controlled, deliberate. He walked around the table to where he could see the tattoo clearly. His weathered face showed no surprise, just a grim kind of confirmation, like a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent room. Mirage operators were the only ones authorized to wear that mark. It wasn't decorative. It was identification. In case... He paused. In case they didn't come back in one piece. Holloway found his voice. But the report said everyone in that unit was KIA. The entire Mirage protocol team was KIA. Tessa's voice cut through his stammering. She lowered her sleeve, covering the tattoo again. Killed in action, that's what the official report says. Filed by Admiral Donovan 37 hours after the mission went sideways. Signed, sealed, classified above top secret. Everyone dead. Clean sweep. No survivors. She turned her gaze to Donovan. He'd backed up a step, his hip hitting the table behind him. His mouth opened, closed. No words came out. Tessa kept talking, her tone never rising, never showing emotion. Just facts, cold and precise. "Except I didn't die, sir. I made it out. Took me 6 weeks to get back to friendly territory. Another 3 months in a hospital that doesn't officially exist. And 2 years figuring out why the extraction never came. Why the abort order went out 30 minutes too late. Why 6 operators went into the ground while you stood at their memorial service and talked about sacrifice." The screen behind her updated again. New text appeared. Accessing personnel file. Operator 07. Classified identity. Mission history. Redacted. Current status. Active duty. Verification confirmed. Then an image loaded. A photograph. 5 people in tactical gear, faces covered, standing in front of what looked like a nondescript hangar. The photo was old, 2 years maybe, with that slight graininess of a quick shot taken on a secure device. But in the corner, barely visible, a timestamp showed the date, and next to it, a mission designation, Mirage Protocol, Operation Sandstorm. Someone in the room made a choking sound. The image was classified, the kind of classified that meant even acknowledging its existence could end careers. And here it was, on the main screen of the SEAL Command War Room, pulled up by a biometric system that had just confirmed the identity of someone who was supposed to be dead. Tessa walked forward. The MPs didn't stop her. Everyone tracked her movement as she approached the main console, pulled out a flash drive from her pocket, and held it up. This contains the original mission logs, voice recordings from the operation, time-stamped, including... She paused, her eyes finding Donovan again. "Including the communication between you and the TOC when you gave the order to delay our extraction. 30 minutes. That's how long you made us wait. You wanted confirmation of the target elimination before you'd authorize the birds. You wanted to be sure you'd get credit for the kill before you brought us home." "That's a lie," Donovan's voice cracked. "We had enemy activity in the area. I made a tactical decision to prioritize your career over 6 lives." Tessa's voice dropped quieter. Somehow that made it worse. You knew the window was closing. You knew we were compromised. The signal intelligence showed hostile forces converging, but you wanted that confirmation. You wanted to be the man who took down the target. So you waited, and we paid for it. She inserted the flash drive into the console. The screen flickered. Then audio began to play. Static at first, then voices, radio traffic, the crackling, compressed quality of combat communications. A woman's voice came through first, tense but controlled. Tower 6, this is Mirage Actual. We are compromised, requesting immediate extraction. A male voice responded, not Donovan, someone from the Tactical Operations Center. Mirage Actual, stand by. We're checking. Negative Tower 6. We have vehicle movement on the North Road. Multiple contacts. We need those birds now. Silence for 3 seconds. Then a new voice, older, authoritative, unmistakably Donovan. Mirage Actual, Tower 6 Actual. Hold position. We need confirmation on the target before we authorize extract. I say again, confirm target elimination. Tower 6 Actual, target is down. Building is clear. We are moving to extract point now. Time is critical. Copy, Mirage. Maintain position at extract point. Do not, I repeat, do not board until we have visual confirmation from ISR assets. Sir, we have incoming. Mirage Actual, you have your orders. Tower 6 Actual, out. The audio continued. 30 minutes of it. Requests for extraction growing more urgent. Reports of enemy forces closing in. The sound of distant gunfire picking up in the background of the transmissions. And through it all, Donovan's voice, calm and measured, telling them to wait, to hold, to give the surveillance drones time to get overhead and capture the footage that would prove the mission's success. When the ambush finally came, the audio degraded into chaos. Explosions, shouting, automatic weapons fire, screaming, then silence, then one last transmission, barely audible through heavy static. Tower 6, Mirage, Actual, we are going down, multiple casualties. I repeat, we are. The recording ended. The war room stayed silent. Several officers had their heads down, unable to look at the screens. Rourke had tears running down his face. Hale stood with his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone, and Donovan had his hand braced against the table, supporting his weight, staring at nothing. Tessa ejected the flash drive and held it up. I survived because I was on perimeter security when it happened, far enough away that the initial blast didn't kill me, close enough to see everyone else go down. I tried to reach them, got close enough to pull one person out. Her eyes found Rourke. Just one. The captain made a sound, half sob, half gasp. His hands came up to his face. His whole body shook. Tessa watched him for a moment, then looked away, her jaw tight. The rest died in the next 60 seconds. I couldn't reach them. The fire was too intense. Secondary explosions took out what was left, and I spent the next 6 weeks making my way out of hostile territory with a piece of shrapnel in my leg and a recording device that somehow didn't get destroyed. She turned back to Donovan. The Admiral had straightened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His face had gone from pale to flushed, a vein standing out on his temple. When he spoke, his voice shook with barely controlled fury. You think you can come in here with a recording and a tattoo and destroy? I'm not here to destroy anything. Tessa's voice cut through his. I'm here to correct the record. 6 people died on that mission. Their families were told they gave their lives in service. But they didn't just die serving. They died waiting. Waiting for an admiral who cared more about his medal than their lives. What would you do if you learned the person in charge had let your brothers and sisters die for glory? Drop a comment. Because the system is about to answer that question, Holloway stood up, his chair scraping loudly. Sir, she can't just, we need to shut this down. Now. Shut it down? Hale's voice carried an edge nobody had heard before. Commander, did you not just listen to that recording? That recording is classified. She has no authorization to... She has every authorization. Hale gestured at the screen, which still showed Tessa's verification status. Operator 07, Mirage Protocol. That clearance supersedes everyone in this room except... He paused, looking at Donovan. Except the person who filed the original report. The person who classified it. The person who had the most to lose if anyone ever found out what really happened. Donovan's face had gone purple. Master Chief, you are dangerously close to... To what, sir? Telling the truth? Hale took a step forward. I trained 3 of the operators who died on that mission. Good people, the best. And you stood at their memorial and talked about the fog of war and split-second decisions and the burden of command. But it wasn't fog. It wasn't split-second. You had 30 minutes to make the right choice. And you chose wrong. The Admiral's hand moved to his belt, fingers brushing his sidearm. He caught himself, froze. Tessa saw it. So did half the room. The tension ratcheted up another notch. One of the MPs shifted his weight, hand drifting toward his own weapon. The moment stretched out, brittle and dangerous. Then Tessa moved. She walked to the console, placed her hand on the scanner again. This time, when it lit up, she spoke clearly. Authorization Ward, Tessa, Lieutenant Commander, Operator 07, requesting activation of Article 9 Review Protocol. The screen changed immediately. Article 9, Command Integrity Review, authorization required, Flag Officer or Designated Operator 07, authorization, verified, initiate review, Y were N. Tessa pressed yes. The war room lighting changed. Emergency protocols activated. Overhead lights shifted from standard white to red. Alarm klaxons didn't sound. Article 9 reviews were silent activations, designed not to alert the subject under investigation, but every terminal in the room locked down. Screens went dark except for a single message. Article 9 review in progress. All personnel stand by for instructions. Donovan lunged forward. You can't! That's only activated when there's evidence of command malfeasance at the flag level. I need evidence. Tessa's voice stayed calm. Which I have. And I need authorization, which... She tapped the screen showing her verification status. I have. Article 9 reviews are automatic once initiated by an authorized operator. The protocol exists precisely for situations like this, when command structure is compromised, when lives are lost due to negligence or misconduct, when the person responsible is too powerful to be challenged through normal channels. She pulled a folder from inside her jacket, not the one she'd been carrying visibly, but a second one, hidden, sealed with evidence tape. She placed it on the table. This contains copies of everything, the recordings, mission logs, after-action reports with discrepancies, communications between you and your staff in the hours after the mission, emails discussing how to frame the incident, how to classify it in a way that would prevent oversight, how to make sure nobody asked questions. She paused. How to make sure I stayed dead. That's... Holloway's voice came out strangled. Sir, she can't have access to those communications. They're protected under executive privilege? Tessa turned to him. Not when they contain evidence of criminal conduct, and not when an Article 9 review has been activated. Every communication related to Mirage Protocol is now subject to investigation, including yours, Commander. Holloway's face went gray. He sat down slowly, his hands trembling. Around the room, other officers exchanged glances. Several looked at their own terminals, wondering what messages they'd sent, what conversations they'd had. The door to the war room opened. 2 men in civilian suits entered, followed by a Navy captain Tessa didn't recognize. The captain carried a tablet and wore an expression of grim determination. Admiral Donovan. His voice carried formal authority. I'm Captain Matthews, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. You are hereby notified that you are subject to an Article 9 Command Integrity Review. You will remain in this facility. You will surrender all communication devices and access credentials. You have the right to legal representation. Do you understand these instructions? Donovan didn't answer. He stared at Tessa with an expression that mixed rage, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. One of the NCIS agents stepped forward, hand extended for Donovan's phone. The Admiral reached into his pocket slowly, drew out his device, stared at it for a moment, like it might offer some escape. Then he placed it in the agent's hand. His eyes never left Tessa. You were dead, he said quietly. You were supposed to stay dead. I know. Tessa's voice matched his. That was the plan, wasn't it? Easier that way. No witnesses, no one to contradict your version of events, no one to point out that 6 people died because you wanted a promotion. She stepped closer. But here's what you didn't count on, Admiral. Dead operators don't file Article 9 reviews. Dead operators don't spend 2 years collecting evidence. Dead operators don't come back. The NCIS captain cleared his throat. Lieutenant Commander Ward, we'll need your full statement, all evidence you've collected, and he glanced at the screen still showing her verified status. We'll need confirmation of your identity through official channels. The biometric match is compelling, but will require additional verification. I have my service records, medical files from my treatment, DNA samples are already on file from my enlistment, and she reached into her pocket again, this time withdrawing a small metal object. A challenge coin. Not the kind given out at ceremonies, but something older, more worn. She held it up to the light. This was issued to Mirage protocol operators. Each one has a unique serial number stamped on the edge. Mine is 4773. You can verify that against the inventory logs. Captain Matthews took the coin carefully, examined it. He pulled out his phone, secured, different from civilian devices, and made a call. Spoke quietly for 30 seconds, then nodded and hung up. Serial number confirmed. It matches the logs. He looked at Tessa with something approaching respect. How long have you been planning this? 2 years. Tessa accepted the coin back, closed her fingers around it. Every day since I got out of that hospital, because I knew if I came forward immediately, it would be my word against an admiral's. A junior analyst with no proof versus a decorated flag officer. I'd disappear into a psych eval or a discharge board, and the truth would stay buried. So, I waited. I healed. I got myself assigned here to his command, where I could watch, where I could gather evidence, where I could be close enough to see how deep the corruption went. She turned to face the room. Most of the officers wouldn't meet her eyes. A few nodded slightly. Rourke had his head in his hands, still crying. Hale stood at attention, his weathered face showing grim satisfaction. The young lieutenant who'd laughed at the beginning of the brief stood with his back against the wall, looking like he wanted to sink into the floor. I let everyone think I was weak, Tessa continued. Let you make your jokes, let you dismiss me, because weak people don't get watched closely. Weak people don't seem like threats. And while you were all laughing, her eyes found Donovan again. I was building the case that's going to end your career. The Admiral's hands had curled into fists so tight his knuckles had gone white. A vein pulsed in his temple. When he spoke, his voice came out choked. Everything I did was for the teams, for the mission, for yourself. Tessa's voice stayed flat. That's what the evidence shows. That's what the review will conclude. You gambled with 6 lives to secure a victory you could claim. And when it went wrong, you covered it up. You classified the truth so deep that even the families of the dead couldn't know how their loved ones really died. You built your reputation on their graves. Matthews gestured to the NCIS agents. They moved to either side of Donovan. The Admiral looked at them, then at the room full of officers who'd worked under his command. Some looked away. Others stared back, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Nobody moved to support him. Nobody spoke in his defense. Admiral, Matthews said quietly, please come with us. For a moment, Donovan didn't move. He stood at the head of the table, in the command center where he had ruled for 3 years, surrounded by the symbols of his authority. The flags, the screens, the photographs of past operations, all of it about to mean nothing. Then his shoulders sagged, just slightly, enough to show the fight draining out of him. He turned and walked toward the door, flanked by the agents. As he passed Tessa, he stopped, looked at her. She met his gaze without flinching. They'll bury you for this, he said softly. You think you've won, but you have no idea how deep this goes. How many people have stakes in keeping that mission classified? You've just painted a target on yourself. I know, Tessa replied. I counted on it, because now everyone is watching. Now it's public record that an Article 9 review is active. Now they can't make me disappear quietly. You made sure of that when you asked me my call sign in front of 30 witnesses. Something flickered in Donovan's eyes, recognition maybe, of how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. Then the agents guided him forward, and he left the war room. The door closed behind them with a heavy thunk. The lock engaged automatically, part of the Article 9 protocol. The room was now secured. Nobody in or out without NCIS authorization until the preliminary investigation was complete. Matthews turned to address the remaining officers. Everyone stays here for now. We'll take individual statements. Everything said in this room in the last hour is now part of an active investigation. If you have information relevant to Mirage protocol, the decisions leading to that mission's outcome, or subsequent actions to classify or suppress information, you are required to disclose it. Article 9 reviews carry full immunity for witnesses who come forward voluntarily. That immunity disappears if we discover you withheld information. The room stayed silent. Several officers had gone pale. Holloway stared at his hands. Near the back, a commander Tessa didn't know well stood up slowly. I have emails from Admiral Donovan's chief of staff. After the mission, they asked me to adjust some logistics reports. Make it look like the extraction timing was different than it actually was. I thought it was just... I didn't realize... That's exactly the kind of information we need. Matthews nodded to one of his team. We'll take your statement first. Anyone else? 2 more hands went up, then a fourth. The fear in the room had shifted. Less afraid of Tessa now, more afraid of being caught in the net she'd cast. Matthews began organizing the interviews, dividing his team to handle multiple statements simultaneously. The war room transformed from a command center into an interrogation facility. Hale approached Tessa. She'd moved to the side of the room, standing with her back to the wall, watching everything unfold. Her breathing had returned to its steady pattern. 4 counts, 4 counts, 4 counts. The combat breathing that had kept her alive in hostile territory and kept her calm through 2 years of planning. That took guts, Hale said quietly. Walking in here knowing he'd try to humiliate you, using it against him. He gave me the opening. Tessa's voice held no triumph, just exhaustion. I had everything ready, the evidence, the Article 9 authorization codes, but I needed him to challenge me publicly, needed witnesses, needed it on the record that I attempted to verify my identity, and he tried to stop me. Otherwise, his lawyers could claim I'd manufactured a scenario to entrap him. You set him up. I gave him enough rope. She glanced at Hale. You recognized my stance, earlier, when the MPs grabbed me. The Master Chief nodded. SEER training, the way you held position without offering aggression. That's not something they teach analysts. He paused. How long were you operational before Mirage? 4 years, 3 deployments. I wasn't always an analyst, Master Chief. That's what I became after, when staying in the field wasn't an option anymore. She touched her right leg briefly. Shrapnel did enough damage that I can't run like I used to. Can't pass the full physical requirements. So, they offered me a choice. Take a medical retirement or transition to intelligence work. I chose intelligence, because I knew I'd need to be inside the system to make this happen. Rourke had stood up. He walked toward them, his face still wet, his eyes red. When he reached Tessa, he stopped, opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. You pulled me out, his voice cracked. That was you. In the fire. I was pinned under debris, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And someone grabbed me, hauled me out. I never saw who. Everything was smoke and flames and chaos. But you... He couldn't continue. Tessa looked at him for a long moment. You were the only one I could reach in time. The only one close enough. I'm sorry it wasn't all of you. You saved my life. I did my job. Her tone didn't invite gratitude. You want to thank me? Give NCIS everything you know, every conversation you overheard, every order that didn't make sense, every time Donovan or his staff acted like they were hiding something. That's how you thank me? By making sure the 6 who didn't make it get the truth on their records. Rourke nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. Everything. I'll tell them everything. He straightened, squaring his shoulders. And for what it's worth, he came to attention and saluted. Sharp, proper, holding it. Tessa returned the salute. When she lowered her hand, Rourke walked away to join the queue of officers waiting to give statements. Hale watched him go, then turned back to Tessa. What happens now? To you, I mean. Article 9 reviews can take months, years, sometimes. You'll be under scrutiny the whole time. And Donovan was right about one thing. There are people with stakes in keeping that operation buried. You've made powerful enemies today. I know. Tessa's expression didn't change. But I'm already dead, Master Chief. That's what the official record says. So, they can't kill someone who doesn't exist. They can't threaten someone who has already lost everything. That's why I waited until I had nothing left to lose before I came forward. Everyone has something to lose. Not me. Not anymore. She touched her right wrist briefly, where the tattoo lay hidden under her sleeve. The 6 who died were my team. My responsibility. I was their senior operator on site. I should have overridden the order, should have called in the extract on my own authority. But I followed procedure. I trusted the chain of command, and they paid for that trust with their lives. That's not on you, that's on Donovan. It's on both of us. He gave the order. I followed it. Both of those things are true. She looked at the door where the Admiral had been escorted out. I can't change what happened. Can't bring them back. All I can do is make sure the record reflects the truth. Make sure their families know their loved ones didn't die because of bad luck or enemy action. They died because someone valued his career over their lives. That matters. It has to matter. Hale studied her for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. You're not what I expected when I saw your assignment orders 6 weeks ago. Good. That was the point. Tessa pushed off from the wall. Now, if you'll excuse me, Master Chief, I need to give my statement. This is going to be a long day. She walked toward where Matthews was coordinating the interviews. The captain saw her coming and gestured to one of his team, a woman in her 40s with the no-nonsense demeanor of a career investigator. They moved to a corner of the war room, away from the others. Tessa sat down. The investigator opened a tablet, set a recording device between them, and began the formal process of documenting everything that had led to this moment. Outside the war room windows, the California sun climbed higher. On the base, normal operations continued. Helicopters lifted off for training runs. Teams ran drills. Instructors shouted corrections. Life went on, unaware that in this sealed room, the foundation of one admiral's career was crumbling to dust. And at the heart of it all sat a woman who'd spent 2 years being invisible, being dismissed, being underestimated, using every slight, every joke, every moment of contempt as another piece of evidence that the people in charge had forgotten the most important rule of special operations. Never assume the quiet one isn't dangerous. Sometimes the quiet one is the most dangerous of all. The screen at the front of the room flickered, updated. New text appeared as the NCIS system began its formal investigation protocol. Article 9 Review, active. Subject, Donovan, Blake, Rear Admiral, Investigating Authority, NCIS status, Preliminary Evidence Review. Phase estimated duration, 72 hours minimum. All terminals in the room displayed the same message. Every officer waiting to give a statement saw it. The investigation was now official. Public record within the classified system. No going back. No covering it up. The machine had started turning, and it would grind forward until it reached a conclusion. Tessa answered the investigators' questions with the same measured precision she'd shown throughout. Dates, times, details, every piece of evidence explained, every decision justified. Her voice never wavered, her hands stayed steady. The combat breathing kept her centered, kept the emotion locked away where it couldn't interfere with the facts. Because this wasn't about emotion. It wasn't about revenge. It was about 6 names on a memorial wall, 6 families who deserved to know the truth. 6 operators who had trusted their command and paid for that trust with everything. The interview stretched on. 1 hour became 2, 2 became 3. Outside, the sun reached its peak and began its slow descent toward evening. The war room remained locked. The investigation continued. And Lieutenant Commander Tessa Ward, call sign Red Mirage, Operator 07 of a unit that officially never existed, sat in the corner of the room and systematically dismantled the career of the man who had tried to bury her. She had asked for 30 seconds at the biometric scanner. She'd gotten something better. She'd gotten justice. And she was just getting started. The interview room at NCIS headquarters smelled like stale coffee and recycled air. 72 hours had passed since the war room confrontation. Tessa sat across from Captain Matthews and 2 senior investigators, a stack of evidence folders between them thick enough to require 3 separate binders. The challenge coin rested on the table, tagged and cataloged. Her service record lay open, cross-referenced with medical files, deployment logs, and classified mission parameters that required clearance levels most people would never see. Matthews closed the final folder. He'd aged visibly over 3 days, new lines around his eyes, exhaustion written in his posture, but his voice carried satisfaction when he spoke. We have enough. Communications intercepts, testimony from 17 officers, the original mission logs with timestamps that contradict the official report, financial records showing Donovan received a performance bonus tied to mission success metrics 4 months after Mirage went sideways. He tapped the folders. This doesn't just end his career. This is criminal negligence resulting in death. Article 106, possibly Article 118 if we can prove he knowingly endangered your team. Tessa's expression didn't change. She'd spent 3 days giving depositions, walking investigators through every piece of evidence, explaining technical details that most people would never understand. Her voice had gone hoarse on day 2. Now, on the afternoon of day 3, she simply nodded. What's the timeline? Formal charges within 48 hours. Court-martial convened within 90 days. Given the classified nature of the operation, it'll be a closed proceeding, but the verdict will be public record. Matthews paused. You understand what this means for you. Once charges are filed, you're a witness in a flag officer prosecution. There will be pressure, attempts to discredit you. They'll dig into everything. Your service record, your medical history, your psych evaluations. They'll look for anything to undermine your credibility. Let them look. Tessa's voice carried no concern. I've spent 2 years preparing for that. Every report is clean. Every evaluation is documented. Every piece of evidence has a chain of custody that can't be challenged. I didn't build this case on my word alone. I built it on his. One of the other investigators, a grizzled senior agent named Chen, leaned forward. There's something else you should know. We've been pulling threads on Donovan's staff. Commander Holloway has been cooperating. He's provided documentation of at least 6 other incidents where mission parameters were altered after the fact. Different operations, different teams, but the same pattern. Prioritizing optics over safety. Delaying extractions or support when it might have compromised positive press coverage. Tessa's jaw tightened. How many casualties? 3 confirmed deaths that might have been prevented. Another dozen injuries. Nothing as catastrophic as Mirage, but a pattern of behavior that shows this wasn't an isolated incident. Chen slid a document across the table. Holloway's been carrying this guilt for 2 years. When you walked into that war room, you gave him permission to unload. Permission. Tessa repeated the word flatly. He could have come forward any time. Could have filed a report. Could have saved lives if he'd acted sooner. Maybe he would have been crushed by the system and nothing would have changed. Matthews's tone carried pragmatism, not judgment. What matters is, he's talking now, and his testimony corroborates yours. Multiple witnesses, multiple incidents, establishes a pattern that makes Donovan's defense much harder to maintain. Tessa picked up the challenge coin, turned it over in her fingers. The metal had worn smooth in places from 2 years in her pocket, a talisman, a reminder, a piece of proof that she'd existed when the official record said otherwise. The families, she said quietly. The 6 who died. Do they know yet? Matthews nodded. NCIS is coordinating with casualty assistance. They'll be notified before charges are filed. They'll be told that new evidence has come to light regarding the circumstances of their loved ones' deaths. That the investigation is ongoing, but they should prepare for the official narrative to change. He hesitated. They'll want to meet you. No. The word came out sharp. Tessa set the coin down carefully, precisely centered on the table. I'm not a hero. I'm the one who survived when they didn't. I followed an order I should have questioned. The families don't need to meet me. They need to know the truth about what happened and who was responsible. They'll want to thank you. For what? Staying alive? Tessa's voice carried an edge for the first time in hours. 6 people died waiting for birds that came too late. I pulled 1 person out of the fire. That's not heroism, that's arithmetic. 1 out of 7. The worst success rate you could imagine. The room went quiet. Chen and the other investigator exchanged glances. Matthews studied Tessa with the analytical gaze of someone trained to read people under stress. When he spoke again, his voice had gentled. You know what separates survivors from casualties in situations like that? Luck, nothing more. You weren't a better operator. You weren't smarter or stronger or more deserving. You were just in the right position when everything went wrong. That's not your fault. And carrying guilt for being alive when others aren't, that's natural. But it's not justice. I know. Tessa's voice dropped back to its usual controlled tone. That's why I'm here. That's why I spent 2 years building this case instead of just walking away. Because guilt doesn't change anything, but accountability does. Making sure the record reflects what actually happened. That's the only way their deaths mean something beyond just bad luck. Matthews nodded slowly. He gathered the folders, stacked them precisely. We'll keep you informed of developments. In the meantime, you're on administrative leave pending the court-martial. Standard procedure for key witnesses. You'll maintain your clearances, but no active duty assignments. Understood. Tessa stood. The movement was smooth despite 3 days of sitting in hard chairs, giving statements, reliving the worst moments of her life in clinical detail. Is there anything else? Actually, yes. Matthews pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase, Navy stationery, official weight paper. He handed it across the table. This came through channels this morning, from the Chief of Naval Operations. Eyes only for you. Tessa took the envelope. Her name was written on the front in formal script. Not her rank, just her name. Lieutenant Commander Tessa Ward. She broke the seal and extracted a single sheet. Read it quickly. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. When she looked up, Matthews was watching her carefully. Good news? They want me in Washington. Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters, meeting with the Deputy Commander. She refolded the letter, tucked it back in the envelope. 3 days from now. That's fast. Usually these things take weeks to schedule. Chen frowned. Must be important. Or they want to manage the situation before it gets worse. Tessa's tone carried no illusions. An Article 9 review of a flag officer is bad enough. If this case opens up questions about how many other operations were compromised by command negligence, it becomes an institutional problem. They'll want to contain it. Matthews shook his head. You're too cynical. Maybe they just want to do the right thing. Maybe. Tessa didn't sound convinced. Either way, I'll go. Hear what they have to say. But the evidence doesn't change. The facts don't change. Whatever meeting they want, whatever conversation they're planning, those 6 names are still on the memorial. And I'm still the one who can testify to what really happened. She moved toward the door. Matthews stood, the other investigators following suit. At the threshold, Tessa paused and looked back. The recordings I provided, the voice logs from the mission, are those being preserved correctly? Proper evidence handling? Multiple copies, multiple secure locations, multiple chains of custody. Matthews's tone carried absolute certainty. Nobody is disappearing that evidence. It's too far into the system now. Good. Tessa pulled the door open. Because that's all that matters. Everything else, the charges, the court-martial, my career, Donovan's legacy, none of it matters as much as making sure those voices get heard. They called for help. They followed orders. They waited when they should have run. And then they died. That's the truth. That's what the families deserve to know. That's what the record has to show. She stepped through the doorway and was gone, leaving Matthews and his team in the small interview room surrounded by evidence of betrayal and courage in roughly equal measure. The hallway outside stretched long and institutional. Tessa walked its length with the same measured pace she'd maintained for 3 days. No rushing, no hesitation, just forward progress. Behind her, the door to the interview room closed with a solid click. Ahead, the exit beckoned with promises of fresh air and sunlight, and a world that kept turning regardless of what happened in classified briefings and sealed investigations. But before she reached the exit, a figure stepped out from an adjacent hallway. Captain Eli Rourke. He'd changed into civilian clothes, jeans, a jacket, nothing to indicate his rank or service, but his bearing gave him away, the way he stood, the alertness in his eyes. You could take the operator out of uniform, but you couldn't take the operator out of the man. Commander, his voice was rough. He'd been crying again, recently, by the look of his eyes. I hoped I'd catch you before you left. Tessa stopped, waited. Rourke seemed to struggle with words, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Finally, he just said what he had come to say. I remembered something else, from the mission, right before everything went bad. He took a breath. You told us to prep for self-extraction, told us to forget the official timeline and get ready to move on your signal. Donovan's orders said stay put, but you were giving us a backup plan, getting us ready to bail if things went wrong. Tessa's expression remained neutral. I don't recall that. Yes, you do. Rourke stepped closer, his voice dropping. You knew. Even then, you knew something was off about the delay. You were preparing us to disobey orders if necessary. That's why I was at the vehicle when the ambush hit. That's why I wasn't in the primary kill zone with the others, because I was following your prep instructions instead of standing around waiting for official clearance. Captain, you saved my life twice. His voice cracked. Once when you pulled me out of the fire, and once before that, when you read the situation and started making backup plans that I was too junior to understand at the time. So when NCIS asks me about the mission, when they want to know about command decisions on the ground, I'm going to tell them that. I'm going to testify that you did everything right, that you tried to protect your team even when it meant bending orders, that if everyone had followed your lead instead of waiting for the Admiral's clearance, all 7 of us might have made it out. Tessa looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried something that might have been gratitude, or might have been regret. Hard to tell. That testimony could complicate things, could make it look like I was insubordinate, like I didn't trust the chain of command even before things went wrong. Good, Rourke's jaw set stubbornly. Because you shouldn't have trusted it. That's the lesson, isn't it? Sometimes the chain of command is compromised. Sometimes the person giving orders cares more about their career than your life. And when that happens, the operators on the ground have to trust their training and their instincts more than the voice on the radio. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object, another challenge coin. Different from Tessa's, this one marked with the insignia of his current unit, but the gesture was the same. He held it out. I don't have a Mirage coin. I was never official part of the protocol. But I want you to have this, because you're part of my team, always will be. And when this is over, when Donovan is in prison and the record is corrected and the families know the truth, I want you to remember that some of us see what you did. Some of us understand what it cost you to stay silent for 2 years. And some of us will follow you into whatever comes next, because we know you'll bring us home if it's humanly possible. The system that failed them is finally answering. But justice for the fallen is only the beginning, because some missions never really end. Share this story if you believe the truth matters more than convenience. Tessa took the coin, held it alongside her own, the 2 pieces of metal representing different units but the same values. Sacrifice, loyalty, the willingness to stand up when standing up cost everything. Thank you, Captain. Her voice was quiet. That means more than you know. Rourke stepped back, came to attention, and saluted, sharp and formal. Tessa returned it. When he lowered his hand, he managed something close to a smile. Go make them listen in Washington. Make them understand this isn't just about one admiral and one mission. It's about whether the system works, whether operators can trust that command will protect them instead of using them, whether— He stopped, swallowed hard. Whether 6 names on a wall means something more than decoration. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Tessa alone in the hallway with 2 challenge coins and the weight of expectations she hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. She pushed through the exit. Outside, the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and shadow. The parking lot stretched out, half empty. Her car waited where she'd left it 3 days ago, probably with a dead battery, given that she hadn't moved it since the investigation began. But she didn't head for the car. Instead, she walked to the edge of the lot, where a low wall provided a view of the bay. San Diego spread out below, the water reflecting sky, boats moving in slow patterns that looked random but followed invisible rules of navigation and commerce. Somewhere out there, teams were training. Operators were running drills. The machinery of naval special warfare ground forward, preparing for missions that might save lives or cost them depending on decisions made by people far from the action. Tessa pulled out her phone, checked messages, one from Matthews, confirming her travel arrangements to Washington, one from the NCIS Administrative Coordinator, providing contact information for witness support services, one from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. The message was brief. No sender identification, just 3 words and a coordinate string. Tower 4 remembers. 38, 770, 765. She stared at the coordinates, ran them through the mental map she'd built over years of operational planning. Washington, D.C., somewhere in the city. The message had come through an encrypted service, the kind that routed through multiple servers and left no trace. Whoever sent it knew how to cover their tracks. Tower 4, one of the call signs from Mirage Protocol, one of the operators who died in the ambush. Except according to the official record, all communications from Tower 4 had ceased at the moment of the attack. No final transmissions, no last words, just silence. But someone had just used that call sign to send her a message. Either someone had access to classified protocols they shouldn't have, or one of the killed-in-action operators wasn't actually dead. Tessa's breathing stayed measured, but her mind raced. 4 operators unaccounted for. That had been the note in her file, the piece of information she'd flagged but couldn't pursue without blowing her cover. She'd assumed it meant 4 bodies they had never recovered. 4 casualties buried in graves marked unknown or never buried at all. But what if it meant something else? What if Tower 4 had made it out? What if she wasn't the only survivor? She saved the message, encrypted it with her own protocols, and backed it up to 3 separate secure drives. Then she deleted the original from her phone. Whatever this was, whoever had sent it, it represented either the biggest break in her investigation or the most sophisticated attempt yet to discredit her. Either way, she'd find out in Washington. The coordinates pointed to somewhere in the city. Someone wanted her to visit. Someone who knew her real identity, knew about Mirage Protocol, and knew she was alive. The meeting at Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters suddenly felt less like administrative procedure and more like the next phase of something much larger. The Article 9 review had exposed Donovan's negligence. The court-martial would deliver justice for 6 deaths. But underneath that official process, something else was moving. Something that involved operators who weren't supposed to exist, missions that never officially happened, and a network that had been waiting 2 years for the right moment to reveal itself. Tessa pocketed her phone and turned away from the view. 3 days from now, she'd be in Washington. She'd attend the meeting, she'd listen to whatever the deputy commander wanted to say, and then she'd follow those coordinates and see who was waiting. Because Red Mirage might have been declared killed in action 2 years ago, but ghosts had advantages the living didn't. They could move unseen, they could gather information without raising suspicion, and when the time came to step back into the light, they brought truths that couldn't be buried twice. Behind her, the sun dipped lower toward the horizon. Shadows lengthened. The day wound toward its close. But for Tessa Ward, Operator 07, the work was far from finished. 6 names had been cleared. 6 families would learn the truth. 1 admiral would face justice for valuing glory over lives. That was resolution. That was the promise kept. But Tower 4's message represented something else. A new mission. A deeper truth. The possibility that the Mirage Protocol network hadn't died in that ambush. It had scattered, gone dark, and waited for the moment when one survivor would be strong enough to pull them all back into the light. Tessa walked to her car. The battery was indeed dead. She called for a jump, waited 15 minutes, got the engine running. Then she drove home through streets that looked ordinary but felt charged with significance. Every intersection a decision point. Every choice leading towards something she couldn't see yet but knew was coming. At home, she pulled up the case files on her secured laptop, cross-referenced Tower 4's original dossier, read through the after-action report that declared the operator deceased, studied the evidence photos from the ambush site, charred debris, destroyed equipment, no intact bodies recovered. Then she opened a locked folder she'd labeled Discrepancies. Inside, she'd collected every small detail that didn't quite fit the official narrative. Gear inventories that didn't match casualty reports. Communications logs with gaps that suggested transmissions had been redacted. Satellite imagery from the hours after the ambush showing vehicle movement in patterns that didn't match the enemy force composition. She'd always assumed those discrepancies represented cover-up activity by Donovan and his staff, efforts to hide their negligence. But what if some of those gaps represented something else? What if some of those redacted transmissions had been made by operators who'd survived the ambush and needed to stay dead for operational reasons? What if Mirage Protocol hadn't ended that night? What if it had just gone deeper? Tessa closed the files, shut down the laptop, sat in darkness and thought through implications that spiraled in multiple directions. If other operators had survived, where had they been for 2 years? What mission were they running that required them to stay officially deceased? And why reach out now, just when the Article 9 review was pulling back the curtain on what happened? Her fingers traced the edge of her own challenge coin, feeling the worn grooves where serial number 4773 had been stamped into metal. Tower 4's coin would have borne a different number, each operator's unique, each one a fingerprint of identity when flesh and bone might not survive. She'd memorized all 7 numbers during training, could still recite them in order, and if Tower 4's coin ever surfaced, she'd know immediately whether it was authentic or fabricated by someone trying to manipulate her. The answers waited in Washington, at coordinates that pointed to a location she'd visit after her official meeting, at a moment carefully chosen by someone who had been watching her investigation unfold, and decided the time had come to make contact. She pulled out both challenge coins, her own and Rourke's, set them side by side on the table, 2 different units, 2 different paths to the same truth. Some operations succeeded, some failed, But the measure of an operator wasn't success or failure. It was whether you kept faith with your team, whether you told the truth when lies were easier, whether you stood up when everyone else sat down. Tessa had kept faith for 2 years. She'd built her case in silence. She'd endured contempt and dismissal and jokes at her expense. And when the moment came, she'd stood in front of an admiral who'd tried to bury her and said the 4 words that changed everything. "Red Mirage, sir." Now someone else was keeping faith. Someone using a call sign of the dead to signal they weren't gone. Someone who remembered. Someone who had waited just as long as she had for the right moment to resurface. The mission wasn't over. Justice for 6 fallen operators was important, but if Tower 4 was alive, if others had survived, then the mission had been running this whole time without her knowing. And now, for reasons she'd discover in Washington, they were ready to bring her back in. Tessa stood, walked to her bedroom, packed a bag for the trip. 3 days of clothes, professional attire for the official meeting, tactical gear for whatever came after. She laid out each item with deliberate precision: spare magazines, encrypted comm device, the tactical knife she'd carried through hostile territory, medical kit compressed to fit a cargo pocket, muscle memory from 100 deployments. Her hands moved through the familiar ritual while her mind mapped contingencies. Primary plan, backup plan, emergency extraction, always 3 layers deep. You didn't survive 2 years in hostile territory by being unprepared. You didn't walk into the unknown without backup plans. She set her alarm for 0500 hours. Training run before dawn. Keep the body sharp. Keep the mind focused. Stay ready for whatever came next. Because in special operations, the mission you knew about was rarely the only mission. And the operators you thought were dead sometimes turned out to be the ones running the most important operations of all. Outside her window, night settled over San Diego. Lights sparkled across the bay. The city breathed and moved and lived, unaware that in a small apartment overlooking the water, a woman was preparing for the next phase of an operation that had started with 6 deaths and might end with truths that would reshape how naval special warfare thought about loyalty, sacrifice, and the cost of command negligence. She returned to the living room, picked up Tower 4's challenge coin, or rather her memory of it, since she didn't have the physical object, but she remembered the weight, the specific pattern of wear on the edges. Tower 4 had been left-handed, kept the coin in the right pocket, and had a habit of spinning it during mission briefs. Small details that might verify identity if they ever met face-to-face. Red Mirage had been killed in action 2 years ago. The official record said so. The memorial listed the name. The families had mourned. But Lieutenant Commander Tessa Ward was very much alive, and in 3 days, she'd find out who else had refused to stay dead, who else had kept faith through silence and darkness. Who else remembered that some missions transcended official orders and paperwork? The 6 who'd fallen would get their truth. Their families would know what happened. Justice would be served. But Tower 4's message promised something more: a network, a purpose, a continuation of work that hadn't ended in that ambush. It had just changed form. And Tessa Ward, Operator 07, was about to learn that staying alive when you're supposed to be dead wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning.